In the recent dust-up over Reformed hip-hop, there has been a lot of discussion about culture and race. Do you think that there is a growing tension between races? Perhaps there are accompanying cultures even in Christian circles, and if so, why?
I presume this question came in because to look at me is to look at someone who's up on Reformed hip-hop.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. He's clearly a man in the know. So this is the problem. When you have racial tension operating at a high level, which we do now. The last time I remember it being this bad was when I was a young man, high school student, late 60s, early 70s. There was I think 68 was the summer where there were riots in cities, race riots. And we haven't gotten to that point, but we've gotten close.
What things would you point to say that we're getting close to that?
Well, Ferguson, Missouri, Baltimore, Ferguson, and those places looks to me suspiciously like the first bubbles coming to the surface in a pot that's coming to a boil. And so I see a bad combination of high levels of animosity and malice in various directions, and certain opinions that are ruled off the table. So certain segment. Well, let's have a racial dialogue. Let's have dialogue. Let's have dialogue, and you guys shut up. That's the kind of situation we're in, and I can just tell you it's not going to end prettily. I believe, unfortunately, many Christians who are involved in the noble work of racial reconciliation have bought into too many of the world's assumptions about what racial reconciliation is actually going to look like. I don't see how you can have racial reconciliation without forgiveness. Yeah. Right? And forgiveness means it's dealt with. Christ paid for it. Christ died on the cross. And when you have a racial reconciliation industry, you've got an incentive and a motive to keep the problem inflamed. So there are some people who are involved in racial reconciliation because they would like to see it accomplished and then go do something else. There are other people who see in racial tension some form of job security. And so I believe that we have gotten to a point where race hustlers like Al Sharpton cannot be called out for what they are, right? And if a white guy like me says that Sharpton's a hustler and he's gaming the system, he's working you over, then I'm considered part of the problem simply for having eyes in my head. And so I believe what's necessary is for the different Christians of goodwill. In our racial situation, it's black and white, but there are other ethnic tensions elsewhere in the world. But primarily, it's black and white, and there's a rising tide of, Hispanic difficulty. But you don't have all the history and the baggage, and the slavery and those sorts of things. Christians of goodwill who are black and white have to be willing to sit down with each other, have to be willing to both hear the other guy out, understand that the forgiveness of Christ encompasses all of it, and each side, I think, has to disavow its skunks and scoundrels, right? So if I can't go into a racial reconciliation meeting and not disavow the white supremacists and not disavow the Ku Kluxers. I've got to be prepared to say that's not what Jesus is all about. That's antithetical to the gospel. I have to disavow that in order to have a place at the table. and I want the black guys on the other side of the table to disavow Obama. And if you're not prepared to say that Obama is a major part of the problem, then you're not serious about racial reconciliation. And someone says, "What are you talking about? What do you mean?" Well, abortion. The targeting. But this is part of the plan for Planned Parenthood. The targeting of the code words that Planned Parenthood used at the beginning for targeting human weeds, for targeting black people, the disproportionate number of black children that are aborted. It is far more hazardous to be a black child in the womb today than in 1857. And if you're not prepared to say that, and if you're not prepared to say that Obama's a big part of the problem, you know, he's going to, if the vacancy on the Supreme Court is filled by Obama, he will fill it with a man who is absolutely committed to the ongoing slaughter of black children. And if you're committed to the ongoing slaughter of black children, and if the guys on the other side of the table, the black Christians, Reformed Christians, if they voted for Obama, I'm sorry, I don't want to hear it.
So you said preaching the gospel in that context is going to be fundamentally important. Yes. How do you not have that just be sort of Jesus speak? How do you apply gospel forgiveness in what's obviously an immensely complicated?
Yeah, well, it's complicated, but it's no more complicated than the history that existed between Jew and Gentile in the first century. And Paul was all about breaking down the middle wall of partition. He went to the wall over. He confronted Peter in Antioch because Peter segregated himself from the Gentiles when the men from James came, and so I believe that racial, tribal, ethnic reconciliation is the sort of the crown jewel of justification by faith. So in Christ there's neither Jew nor Greek, slave, free, male, female. And either we believe that or we don't, right? If
your skin color is more important than your identity with Christ, then you're going to miss out on that reconciliation.
Then you have it backwards, you have it upside down. I have more in common with a black man who loves Jesus Christ than I have with somebody who belongs to my tribe, my family, who doesn't love Christ. So this is another way of saying water is thicker than blood. The waters of baptism are thicker than blood, and my allegiance has to be to Christ first and to my brother second, and I expect the same from him.
And your brother is your brother in Christ.
Right.
Okay, this might be a bit of a stretch, but I want to push into a related but different world. Your reading of Beowulf, and I've heard you walk through this a number of times, where you describe how the author of Beowulf is showing how this whole world is imploding,
right?
And that his world was this Viking world that was imploding because of a constant bloodlust for vengeance, ongoing blood feud between tribe after tribe, where you did this, now I must, in order to get even, do this to you, and the whole thing, the only thing that can happen is for it to all go down.
Right.
And that it's all preparation for the gospel. Right. Do you see a parallel between blood feud and the impossibility of any time solving a blood feud? Comparison between that and certain notions of social justice now. Is it any different than a blood feud?
No, I think it's very, very much that's an apropos comparison. In Beowulf, the various tribes were at each other's throats all the time. They had all grievously wronged one another in countless ways. They were sick to death of that endless cycle of war. They cooked up various devices for solving it. The Weir Guild, where you have a ransom payment for someone whose life was taken, or giving your daughter in marriage, the peace weaving, and they had all these things that they would try to bring about peace, and it never worked. It always collapsed. their makeshift attempts didn't work, and the whole point of the book is to have it collapse right before the first Christian missionaries arrive and preach the gospel, to preach Christ. Well, we are doing the same thing. We have all kinds of makeshift things. We're going to fix things with affirmative action. We're going to fix things with reparations. We're going to fix things with, and it's like the woman in the Gospels. The more the doctors treat her, the worse she gets. Things were pretty bad in my youth. Racial hostility was pretty bad. I mentioned '68 and all the riots there. Then there was the afterglow of everybody apparently buying into Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream." The dream is where a man will no longer be judged by the color of his skin, but by the content of his character. That lasted, 15 minutes? There was a little period where everybody thought, okay, we're going to be colorblind. We're going to be colorblind. And now we are on university campuses, we're back to segregation, right? Where you have to have separate housing because, and white people can't wear dreadlocks because that's cultural appropriation, so things have deteriorated and gotten pretty inflamed again. And I think it's just an example of all the things we're trying are futile. Christ alone is not futile when it comes to people from different tribes getting along.